Bob, welcome to the podcast. Appreciate you coming on.
Thanks very much for having me. It's always good to catch up. I'm glad you've recovered, and it's nice to see you in person, smiling and happy and healthy.
Yes, I appreciate the reschedule as we mentioned before we got on here. But the first thing I wanted to talk with you about, arguably the most important topic, is I think we have a common favorite or one of our favorite sports movies in common, which is Rudy.
Oh, I love it. Yes, brilliant. One of the great movies. In fact, I was alerted to something the other day. I rewatched it with one of my kids, and I didn't realize that the a-hole quarterback was Vince Vaughn, who had like a
Right.
whole secondary career. You know what I mean? It was like one of his earliest roles. I'm like, you can't be the bad guy in Rudy and then the funny guy and everything else that I've watched you in, you know?
I know, that's true. I completely forgot about that. That's great. So I don't know, what were some of your favorite things or what resonated most with you about that movie?
I think as a South African, we know a little bit about NFL, but if there's anyone in South Africa who pretends to be like a guru on NFL, there's just no chance. Statistically, we're just way behind. Our sports are just so different from baseball and NFL and human measurement and all that kind of thing. We're advancing towards it, but we're like rugby is like wrestling mixed with cross country, whereas NFL is
Right.
it's one in front of you. It's like it's a battle and then a rest, and a battle and then a rest. And to understand that, and to understand that like a young guy could just follow his dream, find a place where he could actually contribute, you know, on and off the field, because of the big network of what was happening in a team. For me, my eyes are just blown away. Like, one, the number of people watching it, even in those days, you know, at a famous university like that. The social dynamic of his parents going like, well, don't reach too far, you know, you're just going to fall down, you're just a steel worker type thing. And then a couple of people believing in him, you know, and then the coaching
Right.
staff having this huge like dilemma of, hey, I get it that it's a nice story, but I've got games to win. I've got
Yeah.
you know, yards to worry about on the pitch. And then
Right.
everyone buying in. I mean, it's got to be one of the best like crescendos of the last 10 minutes. You know, the team start walking out and saying, well, you can have my jersey for Rudy. And then he comes on and he's part of it. So it was amazing. I loved all of it.
Yeah, such a good one. My wife years ago, she knows I'm a fan. She bought me this. It's like a small picture frame of the play like a champions today, and it's got Rudy Rudiger's actual signature on it. So it's kind of hanging
Oh,
down there, and
amazing.
it's hanging down there in our basement. But
Wow, that's
it's always a
amazing.
good one to enjoy. Well, great. I thought maybe we'd start out a little bit in some of your early years when you moved to South Africa. You came there when you were 4, right? I think after your dad was done with the military, and he was a doctor, and I believe eventually moved over into sort of a general practice, but he was a pediatric oncologist for a while. And I think, in my opinion, that takes a very special human to be working with children facing some of those, toughest battles of their lives. And I wanted
Oh,
to
absolutely.
get your perspective on how you think that shaped your dad as a person.
Yeah. So one clarification, and I've got this wrong in the past, but so he worked in a specialist pediatric oncology hospital, but he was trained. He was a traditional sense doctor, so he was that's where he was working, and then
I
he
see.
was a surgeon in that space. So, but exactly the same. I mean, you know, every single day you are with palliative care patients who probably close to end of life, you know, and it's a really difficult environment. You've got to be a leader. You can imagine, for me, looking up at him, looking back now, and we've sadly lost him. But like, you know, he went to what was Rhodesia and became Zimbabwe overnight, was conscripted because he was doing the second half of his medical degree at Birmingham University satellite campus, which was in Salisbury, which is now Harare, the capital of Zimbabwe. And they're going, okay, well, it's war breaking out. Well done for coming over here to finish your studies. You're going to fight for this country now. I
Right.
mean, just like crazy. And
Yeah.
then straight out of that into a role where he's seeing kids in that with end of life. So, but he was a resilient, incredibly resilient guy, you know, big family man, like lots of fun and enthusiasm and laughs and that kind of thing. And it's only later on in life I realized how much of that probably early, I wouldn't say trauma, but early ordeals might have formed how much of his love and that went into us as a family. So we were incredibly lucky to have.
Right. So tell me a little bit about how you think some of that did kind of carry over into how he raised you guys and the values that he set in your household.
Yeah, he always had a sort of a joie de vivre, like a joy of life. He had a twinkle in his eye, and he had a lovely way with phrases, and he always kept little quote books. Like you said, the Rudy quote earlier, he would have had fantastic quotes from Benjamin Franklin, or he'd pick something up or a newspaper clipping. And I've picked up the same habits from him. So I've got quote books which I use in daily motivational stuff. So that was amazing because it infused into my life. And then I think what he did was, it was a difficult time, Carl. The rest of the world sees the ordeal that white Anglo-Saxon people in South and Southern Africa has gone through as just one big race thing. It's like black guys versus the white guys. But, everybody like where and how these wars broke out and for who, and there's global powers trying to get like control of huge resources, mines, right, and pipelines and access to seas and mountains and, like coal beds. I mean, a whole bunch of things. It can't just be, people marching through in the middle of the night with Ku Klux Klan things on. It's the opposite of it. It's actually a story of survival on both sides.
Right.
And my dad used to talk very proudly about concept, which I take on, and I actually talk in when we do some team related stuff, the concept of hybrid vigor. So in the old days, to be vigorous was a compliment, like it's energetic, if you know what I mean. Enthusiastic and vigorous he'd be your friend on the wrestling team who's like always bristling and trying to take on people twice their size, and it's like a Jack Russell, not a sleepy big dog, and the concept for him, he said, well, we are so lucky because the rest of the world have all come to Africa by boat or travel or whatever it is. And we've got Scottish influence, we've got Irish influence, we've got the native influence in Africa. We've got Afrikaners who basically trekked to South Africa, some overland, some on boats and came from Belgium. And we've got all this mishmash, which has actually increased our vigorousness, if you know what I mean. We've got the good bits of most of them. Look, we've got the bad bits of some of them too, but I think that's life. And we've got a huge amount of physical prowess in our people. I think that comes from the Dutch and the Scandi influence. And then we've got a lot of, there's quite a religious bent in some of the sort of middle areas and towns of South Africa. So people get brought up with quite a lot of discipline. I wouldn't say it sort of an oppressive environment. Manners are very different. And I see marked difference if I go to a school in South Africa, and I'm talking mixed race. We call Model Cs, like school open to everybody, because obviously years and years ago they tried to separate, but the schools all came together and they created a Model C, which is like partly government funded. You can raise money as the parents and the board, and you keep the land, but you maybe make the school better. And that's probably our most successful school model, as opposed to fully private. And you go into those environments and every kid will stand up, good morning, sir, can I help you? My wife goes and picks up our kids and it's like, afternoon, ma'am, should I call your son for you, type thing. And I think that infuses itself into our team sports, and it infuses it in traveling South Africans and their ability to just go and take on a task. And we're disciplined in terms of we want to achieve something.
Right. It's what's interesting to me about that is your father's perspective. It seemed like he was very much around the power of the collective and what everyone can bring and offer. And I think that's probably something as a young kid that's defining and something that would shape you in a situation like you mentioned, where there's just so much dynamic that's happening. To have that sort of view of everyone's contributions, I think probably would have been a really powerful way to, message to you, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think probably the most important thing that I learned from was like a self-belief infused from, we've got all these people with us, rooting for us type thing. Like we root for them, they root for us. And maybe that was military, maybe that was school, maybe that was working in a medical environment where there's a lot of you type thing. And he definitely fed off the energy of people around him. So that was a great privilege. He was also, I think, a great motivator. I mean, we play traditionally 4 or 5 sports in South Africa, but the 2 biggest ones when I was at school were cricket and rugby. And he used to say to me at the end of the weekend, he'd just say, "Oh, so you're going to have such a difficult decision, And I, you confused this young kid, like, what are you talking about? Because you go out and bowl for like 8, which is like pitching in baseball or batting or, you go and like bowl for 8 hours, and then you run your rugby ball and you're kicking the ball in the garden. You come back and you're just absolutely exhausted. And he was like, no, you're going to have to choose which sport you're going to play for South Africa. What a message for an 8-year-old kid. It was like, for me, it was like, well, obviously I agree with my dad now. That's a lot easier than worrying if I'll ever make it. I was never a great cricketer. I mean, I loved it, but I was never good enough to go to the next level. But you move beyond that, because it's a message to an 8-year-old, which becomes a message to a 15-year-old about work hard, and the one that's chosen you, which becomes a message to a 20-year-old, So I love that.
Yeah, that's amazing. You got me thinking when you were talking about the, I'm a huge kind of motivational quote and all that sort of stuff, like you and your dad. Did he ever save any of those? Do you have them that you can ever go back and look at?
I do. I don't have them with me now. I travel with one of them, because when I do public speaking, I usually pull it out and have a look at something. The best quote that I like is a quote about enthusiasm, and I can't quote it right now. It's about a 6 or 7 liner. It's been attributed to Henry Ford, and it's about enthusiasm being, and that's probably back to what we were talking about, that vigorousness that I was talking about. That's probably what like real enthusiasm is, not just, hey, we're going to the game. It's like enthusiasm, like when you can't crush the guy's spirit type thing. And it's about, enthusiasm is the swing in your step, the irresistible surge of your ideas. Enthusiasm, men can accomplish anything. Without it, there are only alibis type thing. So it's a really cool piece, but I'll send it on to you.
It's pretty special too that you have that, because sometimes those types of things, you may not get them, or they may not be passed on. And I just hearing how kind of much of an influence that had, and I love the idea that you can kind of go back and reference and now and again. It's almost like a bit of a connection back with your father now and again.
That's right. And in fact, I found it on the internet for you. So it says, enthusiasm is the yeast that makes your hopes shine to the stars. Enthusiasm is the sparkle in your eyes, the swing in your gait, the grip of your hand, the irresistible surge of your will, and the energy to execute your ideas.
That's great. I think too, because, I've got 2, super young kids, 11 and 9, fatherhood, and, we're kind of right in the middle of that. So I think it's a period of my life where there's a lot of reflection related to that. And so in case you were wondering, maybe some of the context on the questions, but would love to hear you talk a little bit too about, you've talked so much about your dad and some aspects of your childhood. How has that carried through to you as a father, and what you've passed along to your kids, and what's important to you?
I think it's a great question, because I do self-obsess and talk and think about being a better dad, being present, doing all those kind of things, and then marry that all up with like my own foibles, my own failings, and I'm quite open and honest about them. I find myself commuting for work on a horrible schedule with young kids growing up. I love my time with them, so I'm quite selfish when I'm with them. Yeah. When it's me, I need to be, I'm on video calls with kids because I want to see what they're doing, and I can only see half of them because I'm not always there, and you know what I mean? So I beat myself up about that big time. Yep. And I think I think I'm doing a reasonable job. I've got a great relationship with all of my kids. I'm very proud of all of them and the way they're turning out. But I have to give a whole bunch of credit to my wife, because she runs a good ship. She understands the sacrifices I make. She understands what life she wants. She's not a princess who needs to be looked after and doesn't contribute. She spends so much time, making room for us to be a family despite extra pressures and things like that. And I've traveled around the world literally for my job since I was 18. That's almost like 30 years now. If I had to count the air miles, I've literally been to every corner of the earth, and I continue to do it. But I take my kids when I can. I can't take all of them all the time, but I can take some of them some of the times. So I'm trying to sort of compensate, and then I have this big personal angst about compensating the right thing, or should I just draw a line and move to a small cottage and just like not spend anymore and just sit there and look them in the eyes. But to be honest, I was a teenager. My son's a teenager. I spend a couple of days a week or a couple of hours a week with them, but we do stuff. We go and play 9 holes of golf, or we go to a football game together, or I take them out for a meal. And we, when you're that age, I think you're going through all these things in your mind anyway. You're fighting with yourself. So you don't want your dad to be the guy like, hey, I'm being nice to you. You better, like it. sometimes you just got to turn up and sit there. And maybe after 3 hours of sulking, you get a hug and whatever, and it's okay, but I'm only learning that I said to my oldest daughter, who's just gone to university, I sent her a message the other day. I said, hey, it's my first time too. You know what I mean? You're my oldest kid. I love you with all of my heart,
Right.
and nothing that comes out of my mouth is built from me trying to hurt you in any way. But maybe I'm overprotective, or I don't want to do something, and they rail back at you, and I'm like, it's my first time too. You know what I mean? I've been a kid, but I haven't been a parent before. So trying to learn all the time without getting too worked up that we're going to have, it's going to be squidgy around the edges.
I mean, I love what you said there just too around this idea of like kind of a little bit of that vulnerability and honesty, like it's my first time too. And I think that's something that I try to, as best I can as well with my kids is we're not perfect. Giving them the opportunity to understand that we're still learning and growing even at our age, right? Like, and
Exactly.
It's funny because when you're a teenager, like you said, you're in that mindset, you're in that world. It's a big time in life, I would say. But as you get older, it's like you don't feel like you change. You're just in a different kind of stage and you're still learning. And so I think that the ability to be honest with our kids and share with them that is of great benefit. And like you said, sometimes you get those responses, right? It's nothing you can do about it. But
Exactly.
at least they know kind of where you stand. I want to make a little bit of a transition into some of your sporting career. I'm smiling because there isn't quite much out there that you have not spoken to over the course of many interviews. I kind of had some different questions that I wanted to ask you related to some of the things that you've certainly shared in the past. But the first is starting with painting the picture a bit of those first years as a professional for you. So fact check me here if I get anything wrong. But I think some things that kind of stuck out to me was first, making that transition to a professional athlete alone is incredibly tough. And that's within probably, let's call it the best circumstances and environments. But in your case, your country was moving from, a position where it was a vocation, and now it was shifting to a professional sport. You become the first contracted athlete, and you weren't just dealing with your own transition in this established environment like I just mentioned, but presumably sort of had all the weight of all those other things and expectations there as well. Maybe reflect on just what you remember feeling in the moment in those early stages.
Yeah, I will. Thank you. I mean, I to be honest, I reflect quite a lot on my career and in a very positive light. I've had some tough stuff happen to me, but I've also had some great stuff happen to me. I mean, I've been places that people don't go. I've done things that people don't do. I've seen things that people don't see. I've achieved things that people don't achieve. But I also see the negative as well. And I try and say, well, okay, but that's okay, because to get the good stuff, you had to have the bad stuff. Do you know what I mean? This transition, and you're 100% right. When I went to university in South Africa, which is a rugby powerhouse now, and was only just coming out of apartheid, I mean, we had the talent and the ability and all those kind of things, but we weren't together as a country like we are now in terms of our sport. There wasn't just a pathway in, especially not for an English-speaking guy, especially not for someone who was outside the system a little bit. I went to a fantastic school, but I never lacked for anything. But my parents didn't come from huge means where we were driving around in fancy cars and knowing the pathway and being told through business, this is the coach you got to go and see, or that's the school you got to go to, or whatever it is. So we were blundering through the forest blindly, if you know what I mean, but backing each other. And my folks gave me an amazing opportunity to go down to Stellenbosch University. And the quality of individual around me, I really think that was the rock that sort of sharpened the blade. Like the competition even at residence level, and that for us is, you would actually play in a competition for your residents, then you would play in a competition for your age group, then you'd make it into one of the 4 teams in the club, and then that club would play in a bigger competition. I mean, Stellenbosch is incredibly competitive, even just to get to the fourth team of the first club. And that was, like I said, purely amateur. So I can only be grateful for that journey and the people that I met and friends that I made, coaches who dipped in and out of my life at the team times when I needed them the most, and I'll put a lot of it down to luck. I mean, I've had bad luck and I've had intense good luck. I think one of the things that I look back on very fondly is that I don't have a lot of enemies in the game. You know what I mean? Like, I've played against people, and obviously that's a battle. I've made friends with them afterwards. And rugby is quite a wholehearted sort of, I wouldn't say family oriented sport, although it is. If you and I play rugby against each other, it's very different to us playing tennis against each other. Like, in tennis, you're my rival, probably not going to go and hang out with you 10 minutes after we've just done 5-setter at Wimbledon. Rugby, it's like you can bash my head in, and then I'm happy to come in and have a beer with you. And we go, oh, well done, you got me a good one type thing. So it's quite old school in its values. And because of that, I've been able to meet and get to know and learn and make friends with people that I played with and played against. So I think that's the biggest thing that I learned. And I learned that from very early on, because we had a very genial atmosphere around the teams. Razor competitive, but once you've sorted the wheat from the chaff a little bit and you've got to a team where, the players, I mean, we've had lots of recently, like, anniversaries of certain dates or certain seasons we played or years when we were together as groups on those, not only the residences, but also the teams and then the provincial teams, etc. And friends across all of them. So that I'll take away as something that I'm very proud of. The game itself, you probably the sort of the nub of your question was like, what was it like, on that journey on your own in a difficult period? To be honest, nobody knew what we didn't know. It's quite hard to explain it to someone so professional rugby was amateur. So think of it as I'm talking genuine. I don't know, tag Frisbee in the park. Okay. Some guy turns up and says, hey, I'll be the referee. And then weekly you start turning up, and then, maybe that guy's you, and you say, yep, no problem. Hey, it's good exercise. I'll be the referee. And then next thing you wipe your eyes and you've done 10 years of refereeing, and they give you thank you very much. You get a t-shirt and you've got all these friends, and do you know what I mean? Now, on the 11th year, someone comes in and says, hey, I'm putting $100 million into tag Frisbee. You're the head of the refereeing association. Well done. Did you get better from yesterday to today? No. Did you like it more? Did you have a different skill set? No, they just had an injection of cash. So rugby, the big problem with rugby is they didn't and couldn't prepare for that. So you had people who'd been in elected positions, people who were like team managers for free because they just loved rugby. Okay. Now suddenly the guy goes, hey, give up your other job because I'm paying you per month. Wow. And then the whole team goes, oh God, he's not very good. I mean, he's sweet and we like him, but he always forgets the jerseys or whatever. You know what I mean? And it's like, now we stuck with this guy. Now you can't fire him. Rugby went through, I reckon, probably at least 10 years of sorting that out. And I don't think it's fully sorted out. But that's what happens. Overnight success takes 20 years. That would be the one thing I would say. And I know it's not about me, but my reaction to that is I don't think anybody knew how hard that was.
It's like you didn't know what you're getting into. You didn't know what you didn't know, to your point.
Oh, man. Yeah. I mean, I'll give you an example. I was quite a young captain of the Springboks. And none of this is negative. None of this is negative. You can understand how this would be different. So I was like 25 or 26 and I was like captain of the midweek team. I was like, okay, amazing. Thank you very much. And they were like, hold on, we've selected the team. We just need to phone the head of South African rugby and the minister of sport in the country to validate that the team's okay, because we have to have a ratio of black guys and white guys in the team. And if he says no, I've got to change the team before we announce it tomorrow. I'm in a team. We can only pick from the guys who are there. So you want to, and it doesn't matter, black, white, English, Afrikaans. It's like all cool. I think they justify being there. But there's a ratio that someone else is like imposing, and it's 11 at night and you want to prepare for a test match the next day. And then the facts come through is like, needs this guy for this guy. And now you've trained the whole week and they've just changed your team. So nobody from the outside even knows any of that went on and it was going on. Wow. So I think, and I see it now, I look back and I laugh because it's, people will go, oh, that was a really dark time. It wasn't a dark time. It just happened. It happened overnight and it changed my perspective on the world. It really did. I mean, I played with guys, amazing rugby. I would never have been half the player I was without the people that I played with. 1/10. I mean, I was really lucky to play with incredible people. And I'm talking, I played with a guy called Breyton Paulse, who was probably the first superstar young kid to come through from a really underprivileged background. So he went to a farm school and he played rugby on the farm school team, and the farmer would come out and watch the matches, and he was like, wow, this kid's good. And he paid for him to play for the town team, and then the town team got him picked for Stellenbosch University. I mean, you talk about like rags to riches. This is like a kid who was going to grow up to be maybe a grape picker if he was lucky, you know? And this guy he's now got a media career and has spent 15 years after he retired, after I think probably mid-70 international caps for South Africa as a starting winger and fullback. Wow. You know, and I sit there and I played with him in his first team at Session. I played with him the first time he played for the Springboks. I mean, incredible, you know?
What a story.
So really lucky.
I know you mentioned retirement there quickly, and obviously a focus of what we talk about on this podcast is just the retirement, the transition, kind of the experiences related to it. And one question I had for you, so I know it was kind of before you stepped away, I believe in 2004, it seemed like there was a period of time where you might have been starting to fall out of love with the game. And I think there was a theme that I picked up on, sort of that idea of throughout your career falling in and out of love with the game. I thought that was really interesting. There was some things that I picked up on that you said around that moment in time where, again, like I had mentioned earlier, I think just so much change, so much transition happening for you, happening within the sporting culture there in South Africa, and some things around struggling with life motivation. I think you had talked about the monotony of it a little bit. My favorite one was, I felt like a bloody lab rat at times. Yeah. There was a lot of experimentation that was going on, but I think about big decisions that we all make in life, right? And there's moments before anyone in the public, friends, family know, like we know it inside of us. And I wanted to maybe hear from you. What was your first recollection of starting to have those feelings within you? And then maybe what was the progression of how you finally chose to say it was the right time for sort of that first retirement?
Okay, so I'm going to be very honest with you, as I said I would be. I mean, I think reflectively now, a lot of my negative feelings towards the game and not enjoying myself, etc. Now, as I'm older, I put down to my own immaturity at the time, and I would sprinkle in there, and probably just to stroke my ego a little bit, I would sprinkle in there, my own ambition. Do you know what I mean? I never, ever played a game and didn't want to win. But I had the odd injury. I had a car crash. I came back from that. And then, you have a headline. Is he fast enough? Can he play again? And you just got this wall of doubt. Yeah. And you're trying to be, the vigorous thing we were talking about earlier. You're trying to be the guy. You're like, hey, this is me. And look, I ran the same speed. And then someone says, I was at the game. He looked slow. And then it's public sentiment. I lost complete respect for a reporter because, so I had an injury on my left knee, and I had to play a warm-up game before a big trial. And I strapped my right knee, which had no affliction. Okay. And the newspaper the next day said, still carrying a heavily bandaged knee. Wow. And, why would I do that? Yes, I got my ambition. I want to know if anyone knows what they're talking about. Okay, I've proved that I don't think that person knows what he's talking about. But that's immature and stupid of me to go and do something like that, because I'm probably not thinking about my teammates, my coach, the result. I'm thinking about people's opinion of me. And then I can't, I wish I could go back and tell the 24-year-old me that was the wrong time to be doing that, because what you should be doing is getting into a recovery state and recovering. But I do think that, and I worked with a colleague of mine, who I didn't particularly get on with at the end, but he said one or two things which stuck with me. And this is much later on. I was 40 years old, not in rugby. But he said, we're not going to feel the effects of the COVID episode until we start to see the effects of the trauma that it's caused on the people in changing their lifestyle. And I've explored that a little bit, and there are a lot more people starting to talk about that. Anxiety went through the roof. We dove into screens. We were alone. We couldn't talk to people. Every human interaction was nervous and wretched in a way, like don't come too close. And his take was that humanity carved a huge trauma. The blow of that was a bit like a concussion to the head or something. And I've reflected on that, looking back at my career, and you don't know the trauma that it causes while you are in the spotlight, because the people in the spotlight are consuming you. and they're eating little bits of you. You think about like tiny little drops of you are going into their subconsciousness, and they can spew it back at you eventually. They can praise you for a bit, but it's false praise, or they can detract from you, but it's false detraction, because their opinion means nothing. But at the time, it means everything. And that's the trauma that I think we don't sort of know how it affects people. And I mean, I see examples all the time, oh, he's the next superstar. Is he? Or she's going to be as good as that, is she? Like, right. Okay, amazing. Let's celebrate that when it happens. But like, just keep her on her path right now while she's running so well, or whatever. But it's human, it's very human. We're comparative always, comparison is the thief of joy. And we always comparing, and if you earn, who's on your arm? Do you have a partner that's good enough for the public's view of who you are? Pretty enough, smart enough, the right sex, the right age, is your car fast enough? Is your team good enough? It's like, you don't get out of that. And I believe that's the trauma which all athletes struggle with, because it affects different people in different ways.
That's some great context. Did you have any support systems, did you feel like, when you were going through?
No, we had nothing. And I'm not cross about it, but I advocate for it big time in teams now. I always say, guys, have you got the kind of just conversational support that people need? Because remember, and this is going to sound counterintuitive, okay? Because sports people are quite often seen as sort of dumb jocks type thing, okay? Right. If you're the dumb jock at the top end of a basketball team, how come some guys are Shaq with their money and some guys go bankrupt after 1 year? Why don't you just take the Shaq model and copy it for everybody else who makes make it smaller if you need to, put the money into the right places for the person, and you get rid of 99% of those problems, and do the same with the off-field trauma. If the guy is not looking after himself the way he should be, and it's all junk food and no training, the first thing we do is we get him onto a fitness thing, and we get a dietitian onto them. But if the person's going off their head, in rugby, we didn't have people saying, well, I think this is, I had a rugby agent, and he tried to help, but he didn't know what he's doing. He's there saying, right, I'll support you because I'm making money out of you, but do you think you could do this appearance as well? Because then we earn, and it's like, it's counterintuitive.
It's probably at that juncture this was long before the focus on sports psychology.
I will never be the guy who says, "Oh, we didn't earn enough," or "We didn't have that enough," because we were at the nexus of the sport, man. It's amazing. It's like we were rolling the rock down the hill the first time. It's like that it's just a privilege to have gone through that, And I think if you see it in that light, and you don't go muttering to yourself for the rest of your life saying, "I could have done better." For me, rugby has given me so many avenues to earn, to do things, to work, that I can only say thank you, for the whole rugby interaction. It's given me a few sore shoulders and some crackly knees when I wake up in the morning and that kind of thing too, but that's okay.
It's also too, it is cliche, but it's that idea that those kind of trying moments are where you're growing, the most. So, and we don't always realize it in those moments, but after some reflection, it's generally the lessons are learned. So just moving on a little bit, I think you ended up kind of, after your retirement, you move overseas, you spent some time in London. Wanted to talk a little bit about sort of your experience with Saatchi & Saatchi. And of course, that's my world. I'm in the marketing and advertising world as well. So I just, I'm curious around, it sounds like there was a joint venture that you had with them, but would love for you to talk about, like, how does that come about? Did you initiate it? Like, can you talk a little bit about how it all started and where it all started?
No problem. So like I said, remember the ambition and the naivety. I was really lucky to be able to be scared enough but brave enough to go out into the world. I was doing some TV punditry, so that gave me a sort of a base of earnings that I could survive on. But it's not like, in the UK and Europe, rugby punditry is not highly paid, but it's good visibility. They play that card quite well. They're like, I've got you in front of 1 million people, so we're not going to overpay you. We'll work with you, but then you've got to give on your side. I was doing some of that on the weekends, and then I was looking for corporate gigs. While I was playing, I'd actually founded a small agency called Playmakers, which became a very big agency. My partner bought me out. I wish he hadn't at that stage, but we're still friends, and he did very, very well out of it, and built the agency into one of South Africa's most successful sort of sports, probably I would say sports marketing agency, sports representative agency, but from the sponsors side. So they weren't representing players and stuff. They would take like the South African breweries budget and turn it into something much more effective as a platform for, marketing or selling their beers, and, worked with some of the big brands who are involved in sport. Richard Dunn was his name, and he's a very successful guy and a good guy. That concept was always in my head. And I was like, well, I've come back to the UK. I've decided not to play pro rugby. I'm going to play amateur rugby. I played with my brother, which I loved. I played for the Barbarians, which is a collective team, and got to tour around and do all the fun stuff. But at the time, I thought, our idea in South Africa is actually right for the UK. So we approached the CEO of Saatchi, and we had a mutual friend because he was on the board of New Zealand Rugby. Okay. So the ex-captain of New Zealand, Sean Fitzpatrick, I'd played against, and he'd been quite a good sort of post-career. He worked for like New Zealand breweries and Coca-Cola and Adidas, and he was like an ambassador for them. So I took a sort of leaf out of his book, and I asked him, for an intro. And then I went and proposed this concept, and they said, look, we're not going to just launch into it because we're not sure what money's out there, but we'll fund you and another to come in. And we worked at it for 6-7 months. We won the Adidas account. We did some international work with T-Mobile. We did some amazing work with Ariel around Wimbledon. Wow. And brands were putting money into sport, but it was sort of chairman's folly. They weren't quite aware of how big the platform could be. And as you know, the last 20, 30 years has just really gone into that space. So Saatchi invested. We called the company Esportif, and it was supposedly, it was a made up name. We couldn't find a .com that was free with sport and spirit. And we were trying to sort of be a little bit apart to say, this is an infusion of something that people care about. So you should be using it as part of your advertising, not everything. Right. So we could then, alongside the agency, we could specialize and go in and say, okay, what's a good example? Like Rolex. Well done. Yeah. You've done all your adverts, and you've done all your sort of B2B, and you've done your store facing stuff. But like, timekeeping is what you do. Like, where are you going to timekeep? And I think we didn't do it, but I think they've done great work around show jumping and swimming, and created quite a competitive environment there with the high end sports, because the people playing polo and show jumping, etc., are buying Rolexes. So that was the whole concept. Right. And then we sold that business onto a guy called Duncan Sandland, and Duncan turned it into a half marketing agency, half agency. So he actually we sort of merged. He looked after a few players in rugby and other sports, and it's still operating. I think they might have sold to Wasserman or one of the groups quite recently. So it was an amazing time in my life. I was very lucky.
To your point in the beginning of just that combination of ambition and maybe naivety a little bit to push forward. But I think that's a great lesson, especially where I think the landscape has changed a little bit now, where athletes are thinking more than they were in the past around what they're going to be doing post sport. But anyway, that's a great reflection. So I know we're getting close to time here. I did have one additional question for you, and I'm fast forwarding a little bit to your kind of time there, but I saw something which was kind of resonated with me, where you were telling the story about, a conversation that you had with James Fleming, who was a physio that you had worked with in the past. And I think he had come to you at some point, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but I had saw you playing. You weren't professional at that point. You were still kind of doing the amateur. And it felt like there was sort of like hey man, like you still got it here, or there's something here, And I would love for you to share, like, do you think at that moment maybe he saw something in you that you didn't see in yourself?
Yeah, James is a good friend, and he's one of those guys who's, when he gets an idea in his head, he's really hard to get off the point type thing. And he's an exceptional man. He was a great physio. He's playing a role at one of the high schools in South Africa at the moment now in high performance sport. And is a fantastic guy. And I reached out. I was getting some treatment from his practice, and came in for a chat. And you could see he was like, he wanted to talk, and
right.
And then we were doing some fitness together, and I was out of shape for my standards, definitely, but not terribly so. And I was still young enough that the lifestyle hadn't eroded everything. So we did some hill runs and stuff. And then he organized, I think on the weekend, he had a guy who was doing some fitness at one of the football clubs, soccer clubs in the UK. and he got them to do like an assessment of me, and I wasn't quite strong enough or fast enough or whatever, but he was like, for a guy who's been doing very little for 2 years, there's a lot here, I think you should have a go. And it literally all happened at the same time. I did 3 months of training. He got me in some good condition for a rugby tour for the Barbarians. And after the Barbarians match, I got a call from the coach who eventually hired me. He was like, "Hey, I was watching Barbars today. I didn't know you're still playing." And I said, "Well, I haven't been, but I'll be playing with the Barbars." And we actually beat England at home at England, and it was quite a good match. So he liked that, and he said, "We're in the market for an old, slow person in your old position. Like, what do you think?" And he knew that would really irk me. So I was like, "Okay, well, I'll prove to you." And then I had about 4 months to get in condition before the beginning of the season. Yeah. And James helped me all the way through that, I was really lucky, and went back and played at the Sharks. And then that team, we made the final, and that's how I got back into Rugby World Cup.
That's a great story. Well, I will tell you, there's nothing quite like the pressure of people outside the conference room when they're trying to get in there. So I can appreciate that. So thank you so much for your time today, your insight, and just so grateful for you for coming on.
I really appreciate it, Carl. Always great to catch up. Well done with all the podcasts, and I love the content. Let's keep sharing. Yeah. And I send my best to the family and say you've chatted to Bob now, so we're all done.
It's going to be great. All right. Thanks, Bob.
Okay. Good, man.
Bye.
Thank you, bud.